On today's show, I am talking a crossover with Rylan Stiles, host of Locked on Royals, about Dayton Moore, the new senior advisor in the Rangers front office. All that and more on this episode of Locked on Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked on Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers and Kansas City Royals. I'm Brice Paterik, host of the Locked on Rangers podcast, joined today by Rylan Stiles. We're going to talk about the Rangers' new and the Royals' old front office person who is the old guy, not quite in charge, but just the old guy in the room. Rylan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Brice?
Oh, I am doing splendiferous. And if I was a betting man, I'd say we'd get to a lot of I would bet we'd have a lot of things to say on Dayton Moore. And speaking of betting, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. So I picked your brain a little bit. I used you as a kind of a cheat sheet, a crib sheet, just a notes list that you gave me when the Rangers did make the move to hire Dayton Moore, the former Royals GM, as a senior advisor, I believe is the official term that he is in that role with the Rangers. He is the GM who signed Chris Young to his final major league deal and gave him a chance to win a ring. And I believe he did win a ring on that team, right?
Yes.
So he brought in old buddy Bochy. He also, there were some other options. This was kind of the role that John Daniels, former Rangers GM, was going to settle into. Anyway, he now has that exact role with the Tampa Bay Rays because they know talent in the front office when they see it. And unlike Rangers ownership, who decided, let's fire this guy and have no backup plan, but still keep his, hand-picked predecessor, when there was another guy right there that I wanted the Rangers to hire in James Click, the former Astros GM, who, could have joined the Rangers front office, provided some of that same, guy who had run a team, that old, veteran hand, and also, knew how to, run a winning team as opposed to, kind of stumble into a 2-year run and then be terrible all around that. But, the Rangers have Dayton Moore, and I'm curious as to your unfiltered thoughts on the Rangers hiring of him, not just his tenure with Kansas City, but what do you think the Rangers are getting in this guy?
It's interesting. I think that they're going to get a mentor for Chris Young, for better or worse. My worry, if I was a Rangers fan, would be how awkward is it for Chris Young? As you mentioned, this is a guy that had Dayton Moore take a shot on him in 2015, which of course was allowing Chris Young to be on the team that went to the World Series and won the World Series in 2015, and allowed him to be a big part of it. Whenever I'm not sure how many other organizations would have had Chris Young be a huge part of their roster at that time, but he did really well for Kansas City and had a 3 ERA that year and was probably the best year of his career. I mean, probably not statistically, but the best year of his career statistically on a bigger sample size. The only years better than that were years in which he only pitched 20 innings in a season, so that doesn't really count all that much. So it was the best year of his career, both personally and as a team, getting a World Series ring. He also has an All-Star appearance in 2007, which he might consider a better year. But nonetheless, for Chris Young, how awkward is it that this guy that employed you is now working under you, and he's won a World Series, he constructed a World Series team that you were a part of. How do you tell him no if you don't agree with him on a personnel decision? But all in all, it could work out. It could not. That's kind of how everything works. But my biggest concern would be just that of how they manage their egos and how they manage just the dynamic of flipping roles, really. It used to be Chris under Dayton. Now it's Dayton under Chris. And for me, my biggest thing with him overall is just that I don't think Dayton Moore's a very good baseball executive.
That's totally fair. And as for your point about, switching roles, well, I mean, he already did that first with Brice Paterik. I mean, Brice Paterik was his skipper, and, Paterik talked a little bit when he was leaving San Francisco that, like, it's less fun being a manager now because there is more front office input. And, I think that's as it should be. Like, the front office has a little bit more data and numbers and analytics to, make those decisions. But, he feels comfortable doing that with Bochy, who I think is more respected in his position than Dayton Moore. And, he's in a bigger role as manager as opposed to, just kind of old head who's around to provide wise counsel and talk to people if they don't know who Chris Young is, I guess.
Yeah, that could be a great line of work for him.
Yeah, and yeah, it might be fine. It might be fine, but I mean, one thing that you did mention is that he's able to build a bullpen very well. That is, for all of his faults, which I think you know that and agree that there are many, that is something that he has done well. And the Rangers had a decent bullpen this year, but what were some of the things that he did to build the elite bullpen that, brought Kansas City to back-to-back World Series?
I think it was just the fact of trying guys in different spots helped a lot, and not giving up on players. Like, you think about one example being Luke Hochevar. Like, Luke Hochevar was supposed to be this ace, this star that the Royals had not seen in generations upon generations. He was the first overall pick for Kansas City in the draft. They took him 1-1 in 2006. We all know who else was in that 2006 draft and how many other great players there were.
I actually don't.
Oh, you don't know who was in the 2006 draft?
It wasn't Mike Trout, so
No, it was not Mike Trout. If it was quite the other future Hall of Famer. I'm not going to say because you're going to make me cry if I do say it. So,
okay.
But Luke Hochevar was in the 2006 draft, and he was taking number one overall ahead of the names. Fine, I'll say them: Evan Longoria, Hall of Famer; Clayton Kershaw, who was the pitcher that everyone, of course, would have loved in Kansas City. I hate that you say that because he might be a Ranger now. Dayton Moore might actually get Clayton Kershaw now and do the right thing. Tim Lincecum, Max Scherzer. Like, they took Luke Hochevar over all of these names that we're listing off here.
Ooh.
And most of you listening to this podcast has never heard the name Luke Hochevar before.
I can't. I honestly had to go look him up because I was not familiar with his work.
Yeah, and that was just in the first round of guys that the Royals passed on to draft Luke Hochevar. And so I say that to say this: Luke Hochevar obviously did not pan out. He was a god awful starter. He was absolutely terrible. His first few years in the big leagues, it just was not working. And instead of getting frustrated and just saying, "Oh my gosh, like this is a disaster," we spent the first overall pick on this guy, and he's terrible, out of the University of Tennessee, they put him in the bullpen, and they didn't try him as a closer. They tried him as a fireman. Like, can you just give me 3 outs whenever the game gets in a bind, or 1 out? Back then, because there wasn't the 3-batter minimum rule. Whenever we need a specialist, and he did that and executed that at a very high level. And so now you've added 1 piece to your bullpen. Well, if you do that with 2 or 3 failed starters, now you've added 2 or 3 pieces to a bullpen. Now you go acquire an actual bullpen arm, that's 4, and now so you see how you're building up depth in the bullpen. So it's just finding unique ways to get guys kind of in the right spot. And you look at how he just manages people. I think that had a lot to do with just kind of how the Royals use, say, Kelvin Herrera in a more of a setup role than in a true closer role. They knew that you could just blow past guys in the 8th inning. 9th inning, you need Wade Davis. You need somebody like Greg Holland to put it all together. But even dating back further, like and more recently, the Royals still, even as bad as they've been, they've had good bullpen arms. Even this year, Scott Barlow was good. Josh Staumont was good. Like, he just has a knack for finding bullpen talent.
Well, that is always something that good teams need, and hoping the Rangers can be a good team. Coming up, we're going to get to a little bit more about where these two teams differentiate a little bit at those 2015 teams for both of our organizations, and how I think the 2015 Rangers were actually better than the team that won the World Series that year. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We've got it all at betonline.net. What are some things that you would bet on? Rylan is also the host of Locked on Oklahoma City Thunder. What would be a smart bet for someone who wanted to bet on the Thunder?
I would bet on SGA to make his first All-Star game.
Ooh, that would be a great bet. He is having a fantastic season. You know, they're always, betonline.net is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now we are here with Rylan Stiles, host of Locked on Royals, talking about these two different teams in 2015. I don't know if that was... It might have been in the top 5-ish Rangers teams. I think for me, it's probably somewhere in those 2010 to 2012. All of those are the top 3. And then 15 and 16 is kind of where I go back and forth. I think 15 might be the 5th best team that this Rangers team has had. Maybe 14 was better. Or 13 was better. I don't know. Beside the point. But the Royals won the 2015 World Series. They had success when they made it to the postseason, like the Rangers, who their first 2 postseason appearances, well, at least under the GM that they had, I think both of them hired their GMs that, lasted until this year in 2006, if I remember that correctly. And both the first time those two went to the World Series, it was back-to-back years to the World Series. Now, in my alternate mind history, the Rangers did win their second one, the second trip in 2011, but the rest of people remember it differently. And that's fine. They're entitled to do so. For my own mental health, I kind of remember it that way. But that 2015 Royals team, it's just, I look at this roster and one word comes to mind. It's just fraud. Just fraudulent. Absolutely fraudulent. How in the world did this team win a World Series? I don't understand, man. I don't understand. How?
Yeah, so, look. First of all, they had the best bullpen we've ever seen put together, better than that fraudulent Cincinnati Reds bullpen. So that's clear-cut number one. Like they had the best bullpen ever in 2014, 2015. So clear in a way. Somehow they got Eric Hosmer to play well. Somehow they got that to have happen. And then Salvador Perez was awesome. Lorenzo Cain was awesome. Mike Moustakas got sent down and got recalled and then played well. And then a dude who was, for the majority of his career, the worst hitter in all of baseball, and in every single category, Alcides Escobar, just couldn't stop hitting in the postseason. So that was a huge help. And then Kendrys Morales, was incredible, and that was like the one shrewd move Dayton Moore ever made. And when he made it, it got the team better. He went off and said, "You know what? Billy Butler's been here forever. He's been here since the beginning. He's been a fan favorite. He has the barbecue sauce. He has the merchandise. He has the jersey sales." But he's just not good enough. So in 2014, after the 2014 season, they shipped him off, got rid of him, brought in Kendrys Morales to replace him at DH. And Kendrys Morales was a much better player in 2015. And without Kendrys Morales, you do not win that World Series. And so it's like, why didn't you do more shrewd moves like this? Because it created a World Series winner. And then trading for Ben Zobrist was awesome. Ben Zobrist was arguably the best player in the playoffs. But of course, Salvador Perez deserved the World Series MVP. But this was just a team, besides the historic bullpen, that did everything well, and was an elite fielding team, and was an elite base running team, and just manufactured runs. This was the last great team to watch. I'll say it, and I don't say that as a biased Royals fan. I say that as a baseball fan. This team was not just a sit on your hands and wait for a home run. It is so boring to watch modern baseball, and I hope that being the shift gets us back to real baseball.
You've been watching Kansas City Royals baseball, and that's just bad baseball, all right?
Look, it's so boring watching real baseball now, because look, all you do is sit there and you wait for 9 innings and say, okay, when is the home run going to come? Okay, there's the home run. All right, let's turn it off. Ball game's over. That's all you're doing nowadays. But back then, the Royals would go station to station. They would go first to third. Lorenzo Cain would score first to home in the rain, after a rain delay, in Kauffman Stadium, in Game 6 against the Toronto Blue Jays. Like, it was actual baseball being played by Kansas City. That's how they won. They played team baseball, and it was the last great vintage team, and I'm not sure we're ever going to see one ever again. I hope that we do, but that's kind of how they won the World Series and how they did it. I will say, though, after saying all that glowingly for the Royals, these two Royals teams are the exact reason why I cope so much about teams not trying to win in baseball. I get it in basketball. I get it in football. In baseball, the sport is so fluky, it's so random that any team that gets in, if you put last year's Pirates team in the playoffs, they have a shot to win the World Series because it is just stupid. Like the Royals in 2014, they should have lost that wildcard game 3 different times in the course of that game. They didn't lose it, though. None of the 3 times. They went on to somehow sweep everyone else on their way to the World Series and fall to the Giants in Game 7, one of the Giants being one of the most dominant dynasties we've ever seen in our lifetime, you and me, Brice. And so in 2015, the Royals come out, and they should have lost to the Astros. The Astros had them on the ropes. The Astros should have knocked them out, and it created the Astros into these just cheaters because they couldn't help themselves. They were just festering after blowing this lead to the Royals. They had everything in front of them, and yet the Royals came back and beat the Astros. Should have lost there. They should have got blown out by the Blue Jays. Didn't happen. They should have lost to the Mets. They won that Mets series in 5 games, and the Royals still should have lost because, number 1, the Mets blew Game 1. And then number 2, Lucas Duda can't throw first to home. If Lucas Duda throws first to home as a professional baseball player and gets Eric Hosmer at the plate, that kills all momentum. The Mets win Game 5, and then who knows what happens in Game 6 and 7. So, like, the Royals are living, breathing proof that you don't have to be the Dodgers. You don't have to be the Astros. You just need to get in. Just get in somehow. And then you can just surprise a team in 4 games.
Yeah, and the Rangers have the manager who, like, I feel like managers in this day and age, their influence is a lot of times over-exaggerated, like, especially with how, front offices are kind of making a lot of those decisions. But in the postseason, that's where the managers really, make their name, make their money. And that's why the Rangers, they need to get into the postseason. I don't care how they do it. You don't have to win your division. You're not going to. The Astros are going to be better than you unless you, spend Mets level money and also make a couple trades. Like, you're not going to win that division. And that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to. Remember those times when you won the division and you didn't win the World Series? Yeah. You did that 4 times. I would gladly take a wild card round spot, a 3rd wild card even. Don't care. Don't care. Just get into that freaking postseason and let the fluky things happen. I mean, that 2015 Rangers team, the 2016 team was better, but like it was composed of, Colby Lewis, who was great in the playoffs. Martin Perez was still there. Actually, I think he was hurt towards the end of the season. But the Rangers brought on Cole Hamels at a trade at the deadline. I mean, the rest of their offense was basically... It was Mitch Moreland having a career year, Rougned Odor in one of his few good years, and Adrian Beltre. Also, Prince Fielder was present, as was Shin-Soo Choo. And the rest of it was just not a whole lot going. But the Rangers made that trade. They fended off basically the exact same core that the Astros have had for the last, 6 straight ALCSs that they've made. And the Rangers kept them from the playoffs, or from the winning the division that year and the year after that, which is just absolutely hilarious. The Rangers didn't do anything with it. I wish they did. I think they had some really good teams there that could have gone somewhere in the playoffs, but they did that. And I think, I don't even know where I was going with that, but yeah, no, those teams, the 2011 team, 2012 team, like that 2012 team was probably the best team that the Rangers had. Like it really was. It was, you had dominant pitching. You had the first year of Yu Darvish, the insane offense that had powered that 2011 team. Not quite the same level. Mike Napoli wasn't on as much of a ridiculous tear as he was the year before, but it was still a really good offensive team. And the Rangers lost because of the stupid 1-game playoff, which I will never forgive. Great theater, but also horribly miserable for those who were participating in it. If you have no dog in the fight, great, but as well as I do, it hurts real bad when your team well, I guess your team hasn't lost any of those games. They just won them. But you know how miserable it is to be in the middle of it. But anyway, I'm curious as to your thoughts on what you think were some of the biggest flaws in Dayton Moore as a general manager? I know that we talked a little bit about it before, but I mean, he got his ring, and that's great and should be celebrated. But outside of those 2 World Series trips, the Royals didn't make the playoffs at all in any of his other years. Was that because of some, colossal mishap, like, I don't know, a number 1 overall prospect injuring his arm while sleeping and never being the same, or a guy who is the peak of durability in all of baseball, just having a career-ending neck injury and retiring before he turned 32, or was it just he wasn't that great a GM?
He just wasn't that great of a GM, to be completely honest with you, and it just wasn't that great of a small market GM, especially like. The Royals refuse to make the moves that you have to make. Like, they refuse to make what I call non-family friendly moves. Like, it's easy to hold on to Whit Merrifield, and everybody's calling him 2-hit Whit, and every little kid in the stands has his jersey, and he's on the Price Chopper commercials. But the bottom line is, Whit Merrifield did absolutely nothing in Kansas City, didn't win anything. The team was not good enough to win anything whenever he was here. The Royals held on to him until this year, in which he, A, made a fool of himself in the media where he just had to trade him because of the way that he handled the whole COVID vaccine thing. And B, he was having the worst year of his career statistically in every single category, both offensively and defensively. That's incredibly hard, folks, to have the worst, literally the worst, in literally every statistical category. Both sides of the plate, you're having the worst you've ever had. And that's pretty tough. But that's when they like to trade him. Not whenever he's playing at an all-star level, not whenever he's playing really well, but then they're going to trade him at that point whenever his value is absolutely nothing. It's just nothing. And so it was a classic case of that. Like the core Moustakas, Hosmer, Kane, I get not trading those guys in 2016. You just won the World Series. You need to celebrate it, whatever. 2017, though, at the trade deadline, everyone knew this team was not good enough. They just weren't. They weren't there. They weren't good enough. You have to trade those guys. You cannot let them walk for nothing whenever you know you cannot pay them. You know you cannot re-sign them. You know that the Padres are going to swoop away Hosmer and the Brewers are going to swoop away Kane. You just have to trade them. And then, even a move like, Gordon versus Zobrist. Like, who was the better player? Ben Zobrist was the better player. Who did you re-sign? Alex Gordon. Other franchises and small market teams, if they're going to re-sign somebody, wouldn't do that necessarily. Like, they wouldn't just re-sign Gordon because he's the very best player of this generation, or like a fan favorite, I should say, of this generation. So it was just more of those family-friendly moves and less of those let's win baseball games moves.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that really bothers me, it seems like he's not done a great job of, is drafting and developing talent. And that, for all the things that I really like John Daniels and really praised him for doing well, he made some pretty good moves trade-wise. He made the occasional stinker, but I think more times than not, he did the right move and it paid off for the Rangers. But the thing that the Rangers have not done well under his watchful eye, or really, honestly, pretty much any GM's watchful eye in this franchise's history, is draft and develop players well. I mean, they got Elvis Andrus and Matt Harrison and Neftali Feliz all in that trade for Mark Teixeira to the Braves, and that's great. And they did a good job to develop those guys. Some of the guys in the later rounds, like Ian Kinsler was, I believe, like a 20th or 30th or 82nd round pick, and he ended up being absolutely phenomenal. The Rangers have done a really good job of getting those guys in like the late rounds, and like, oh, this guy shouldn't have been even making it AAA, but he ended up having a pretty good major league career. But in the first round, in the early rounds, and until recent years, it's looking a little bit better. Still not totally sold because none of them have really made it to the big leagues and started doing things yet, outside of Josh Young, and he's only done that in 25 games, so I'm still pumping my brakes. But I think that was something that I would want if the Rangers were going to bring somebody in, if they're going to make some wholesale changes in the front office, as opposed to just, look at me, I'm stomping around, I'm a big guy with some money, so I'm going to fire this John Daniels guy who's been here and for some reason gets a lot of hate from the fans because he wasn't Nolan Ryan. Because 70-year-old Nolan Ryan was definitely the one running those 2010 teams, not John Daniels. But anyway, I would rather have a guy who knows how to draft and develop players on the margins well. That would be something this team could use, and they didn't take that chance to go do that with James Click or, I don't know, somebody else. Like, just steal somebody from some organization that knows how to do that well. It's not a secret who they are. It's not a secret. Cleveland's really good at it. Milwaukee is pretty darn good at it. The Rays are excellent at it. The Dodgers, well, they're really good at it, but they did what you should do as a team in a bigger market with theoretically more money to just money whip some guys. Like, yeah, spending $325 million on Corey Seager is good, and you should do that. But also, less expensive, but will pay bigger dividends, I think, is spending money on stealing GMs from the poor teams so that they can, go to teams that will actually draft, develop those players, and then pay them to stay there. And then you could beat those poor teams because they are poor and lose their good players for nothing. I don't know. Maybe that's too controversial, but that's just me. I'm simply built different.
I think that's the exact way to run a business whenever you have the luxury of doing so. So, yeah, you didn't get that guy though, Dayton Moore. You just didn't. He's a terrible drafter, terrible developer, terrible GM. Great person though.
Well, that's nice. It's nice to see him hiring great people, and it seems like Brice Paterik is great people. And I don't know what kind of GM Chris Young is going to be. We've seen a few things he's done a little bit differently than John Daniels, so clearly he has his own ideas, and I think that's great. I think some new ideas are good, but I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, I would like the one thing I will say for Chris Young, the one thing that he has done well is prove what kind of a salesman he is. Looking back in hindsight, I thought it was John Daniels that was the one that was, sweet talking these big money signings to come to Texas, and they were talking a whole lot the entire second half of last year, which was absolutely miserable because they were terrible en route to their first 100-loss season since the 1970s, and they traded my large adult son Joseph Nicholas Gallo, and were just completely unwatchable in the second half. And they're like, oh, yeah, this sucks, but we're going to go get a Corey Seager. We're going to get a Carlos Correa. We're going to be in the mix, and we're going to get one. I'm like, no, you're not. Why would anyone come here? And then they did. And he also talked Brice Paterik out of not quite retirement. He made very big point to say that. And he convinced him to come to this Rangers team that has not been to the playoffs since he was winning his most recent World Series, which has been a hot minute. And so I think that he should have used that sweet talking power to sweet talk James Click as opposed to Dayton Moore. But I think just having an adult in the room, because Chris Young has only been in a front office for like 2-3 years, I think, just like in a front office at all. He worked in the commissioner's office for a little bit, and I think that was helpful, but it's different than actually running a team. And while obviously I don't love the Dayton Moore hiring, just having someone who literally knows how the sausage gets made of, okay, here's how you, as a professional, like prepare for the Rule 5 draft. And not that there weren't other guys in the room, but just having someone who's been in charge of it, I think can be helpful. I just kind of wish it was someone else. And I'm going to keep whining about it until the Rangers go and make some big move and give me something else to talk about. Cause, yeah, I am ready for those freaking winter meetings. What about you?
Yeah, that'll be fun to see all the drama from the winter meetings.
Yeah, there will definitely be a little bit. Do you think what kind of things are the Royals even looking to do at this point? I mean, I know there's not a whole lot of money to be spent, but there is one former Royals free agent that I wanted to talk to you about and pick your brain. That is Andrew Benintendi. He had a pretty decent season with the Royals, a guy who plays left field, and the Rangers, well, if they're going to add one bat, it seems like they're going to add 2 starting pitchers and 1 bat, and the one spot that isn't pretty clearly locked in is left field. And I'm wondering what you thought of Andrew Benintendi's season, and I think there's like an $18 million average annual value is what he's projected to make, something in like the 3 years, whatever 3 times 18 is. I'm not doing that math off the top of my head because it'll be wrong. $54 million, I think. But would you, if you were a team with money, would you consider adding him to your team? Did you like what he brought to the Royals this year?
Yeah, I love what he had with Kansas City this year. And if you had the money to spend, I would do it. I think that it is a guy that can play well on both ends, defensively, offensively. Also, I just think that his bat is pretty replicable. The only thing is, I wonder how much the ballpark factor matters in the sense of not a huge home run guy, like is going to shoot the gaps a lot, which is obviously easy in Kauffman Stadium, or at least easier in Kauffman Stadium than most stadiums. That's interesting. What I would say is, if you had the money, meaning as long as this isn't going to tie you up in the sense of you can't do anything else. Like if you sign him, you can't do anything else, then I'd do it. If he's going to be the guy that you sign and then you go, okay, now we're tapped out because now we've got him, now we've got Seager, now we've got, Simeon. It's too much. It's too much. Don't let him push you over. But if you're comfortable, I'd sign it because I think that you'd just be hard pressed to find somebody at that level of production, especially with more protection in the lineup. His Yankee career, he got hurt, and it was just a awkward time in New York for him. Looking at his Kansas City career, he had absolutely no protection in the lineup, no help at all. And I think that whenever you put him in a lineup that has some help, you can get even better. So I like Andrew Benintendi a lot, and I like what he did in Kansas City.
Yeah, I think that would be the case with the Rangers. I mean, obviously, priorities 1 through 17 are starting pitching, and then, get some more starting pitching. So I think they're probably going to spend big on one of those big three. And the Rangers right now are kind of in the lower to mid tier of payroll, and they have a lot to spend. So I think they're going to add somewhere around 60 to maybe 80 million in payroll this year. So if you had 17 to him, and I think what you're talking about in the lineup protection, he would not be in the Rangers' top 3. He would not be batting cleanup. I don't even think he'd be batting 5th. He might be the 6th or 7th hitter. And if this guy is your 6th or 7th hitter, and I think one of the things that he does really well, that it plays the type of baseball that you like, is the putting the ball in play and turning the lineup over. And we saw that. I mean, the Yankees lineup in the ALCS, they were bomb or nothing. And the Rangers' top 3 isn't really like that, but kind of in the middle of the order, it seems like they're going to be a little bit more like that. And Adolis Garcia, he gets really, really big hits, but he doesn't put the ball in play as much. His on base isn't as high. And it seems like Andrew Benintendi is a guy who you would, if you have a pretty deep lineup, then putting him towards the back end of it to kind of help, turn the lineup over and get, keep the inning alive to get to those top 3 hitters, which are really darn good, then I think that would be an ideal role that he's suited to, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
And if you do add him defensively, the Rangers have basically 3 Gold Glovers in the outfield, and that would be pretty fun. Their infield defense is sus, to put it mildly, outside of Marcus Semien. But the outfield defense, I know you like defense, and so you might want to watch if the Rangers get someone like him, or even if they have Bubba Thompson, who is a joy to watch in the outfield. You might want to enjoy watching some Rangers baseball. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Rylan, thank you for joining me in the Dayton Moore trash talk session that this turned into. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers and Locked On Royals your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, the biggest games, plus instant reaction, game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.